What if everything you thought you knew about Native American history was just a guess? I mean, think about it. Your history class, the movies, even that one family story your uncle swears is true. What if it's all a little off? Yeah, I said it, off. And here's where it gets juicy. DNA tests like Ancestry and 23andMe are out here telling Americans not exactly what you think. Raise your hand if you've ever heard someone claim, "Oh yeah, I'm part Cherokee." But then a spit test comes back and plot twist, they're not. Ouch. That moment hits like stepping on a Lego in the dark. And honestly, it happens more than you think. Some people look at the paper trail, some at the family stories, some at the, "he's got the spirit of the plains in him." And then there's science waving its little DNA flag saying, actually, nope. Here's the thing. History is messy. It doesn't care about your feelings. Tribes migrated, records were lost, colonizers rewrote stories to fit their own narrative, and somewhere along the way, America started believing in lost tribes that might not have been lost at all, just misidentified. And the funny part, your great-great-grandparents might have just been really good at storytelling. Let's make this interactive. Drop in the comments if you or someone you know took a DNA test expecting fireworks, only to get a polite shrug from science. You know, the kind of shrug that says, "We tried, history tried, but not quite." By the end of this video, you'll understand why two DNA companies can look at the same person and give completely different stories. Why some histories are celebrated, while others vanish. And why sometimes believing in the myth is just as entertaining as discovering the truth. So buckle up. We're about to dive into a past that's less clear-cut textbook and more choose-your-own adventure, but with receipts, charts, and some very confused scientists along the way. Visuals rolling, ancient maps fade in, old parchment, hand-drawn borders, names misspelled. Then hard cut to a modern DNA lab, white coats, test tubes, computers glowing. Let me ask you something real quick. When history was being written, who was holding the pen? Because these maps, they're not neutral. They're opinions. Ancient maps weren't Google Maps. They were guesses, political statements, and sometimes straight-up propaganda. Borders moved, tribes were renamed, entire nations were lumped together because someone in Europe couldn't pronounce the real name. And we've been calling that fact for centuries. Now cut to a DNA lab. No stories, no family legends, no "my grandmother told me," just genes. And suddenly, DNA starts disagreeing with history textbooks. Awkward. Overlay text. Who's wrong, history or DNA? Now here's where it gets spicy. Roll the clip. Trump confidently talking history, strong opinions, big certainty, no doubt. And then scientists quietly running numbers in the background like, yeah, that's not what the data says. And this isn't about politics, it's about something deeper. Confidence doesn't equal accuracy. Let's be honest, history rewards confidence. DNA rewards evidence.
Quick pause. Comment right now.
Which do you trust more, your history book or your genes? Don't overthink it. Go with your gut. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people skip. History often tells us who had power. DNA tells us who was actually there. Entire native communities were erased on paper, but survived biologically. Others were absorbed, renamed, or mislabeled. So when DNA says, "this doesn't match the story," it's not being disrespectful. It's being honest. And yeah, sometimes that honesty hurts. It's like finding out your favorite family myth was more fan fiction than a documentary. But here's the mature takeaway. Truth isn't an attack. It's an upgrade. This channel isn't here to cancel history or worship DNA like it's a god. It's here to put them in the same room. Lock the door and let them argue. Because somewhere between ancient maps and modern genes, the real story has been waiting. And we're about to uncover it. So now let's talk about the so-called lost tribes. Because history makes it sound like entire communities just packed their bags, disappeared into thin air, and said, yeah, we're done. But let's be honest, they weren't lost. They were just ghosting history for a few hundred years. And honestly, respect. Back then, records were messy, borders were shifting, and names kept changing. One year, a tribe had one name. 10 years later, new name, new spelling, new location, new confusion. It's like trying to track someone who keeps changing their Instagram handle. Now imagine historians trying to follow tribes that were migrating, merging, escaping conflict, surviving colonization, and adapting in real time, with zero GPS, zero satellites, and zero Google Maps. No wonder things got blurry. So what did they do? They guessed. They drew maps based on second-hand stories, blurry accounts, and sometimes vibes. And once those guesses made it into textbooks, they became fact. Fast forward to today, enter DNA. Suddenly, scientists are discovering genetic footprints in places history said, nah, nobody important lived here. And DNA's like, actually, here's the receipt. Now watch this. On screen, old map showing where a tribe was thought to live. Cut to modern genetic map showing where their descendants actually are. And the difference? Wild. Some tribes believed to be extinct were found living under completely different identities. Others were absorbed into neighboring nations. Some simply changed names and kept moving. They weren't gone. They were just mislabeled. Now, quick interactive moment. Pause and think. Which tribe do you think DNA revealed first? Drop your guess in the comments before we reveal it. Was it the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Algonquin, or a tribe you've never even heard of? Here's the deeper truth most people skip. History often remembers power. DNA remembers survival. And survival doesn't always leave neat paper trails. These communities adapted. They blended. They hid when necessary. They evolved. And now, centuries later, science is slowly pulling back the curtain, showing us that lost doesn't always mean gone. Sometimes it just means misunderstood. And what we're about to uncover next, one of the most shocking rediscoveries in Native American history. Stay with me into Trump and history, 4:30. Now let's talk about a moment where history met confidence, and confidence blinked first. Because if there's one thing Donald Trump has never been short on, it's certainty. Strong statements, big claims, no hesitation. Over the years, Trump has made bold references to American history, especially Native American history, often leaning on simplified narratives, stereotypes, or ideas that sound right if you don't look too closely. And for decades, that's how history worked. If you said it confidently enough, people nodded. But then something changed. Enter DNA. See, DNA doesn't care how loud you say something. It doesn't clap. It doesn't argue on Twitter. It just quietly checks the math. So when modern DNA research started mapping native ancestry, tracking migrations, intermarriage, and survival patterns, it began correcting stories we thought were settled. And suddenly, history wasn't as simple as tribes were here, then gone. DNA was like, actually, they moved. They merged. They survived. They're still here. Hook moment. Turns out DNA has receipts, and they don't lie. Now let's be clear, this isn't about politics. This is about a bigger pattern. History often rewards confidence. Science rewards verification. And Trump, like many leaders before him, repeated versions of history that were already oversimplified. Stories shaped by old textbooks, outdated research, and sometimes straight-up assumptions. DNA didn't attack those stories. It audited them. And that's uncomfortable for everyone, not just politicians. Because let's be honest, how many of us have believed something our whole lives, only for science to quietly tap us on the shoulder and say, yeah, about that. Quick interaction, comment below. Have you ever been personally corrected by science? Diet myths, health advice, family history, be honest. Here's the mature takeaway most people miss. Being wrong isn't the problem. Refusing to update is. History isn't broken because it made mistakes. It's broken when we refuse to revise it. And that's what makes this moment powerful. DNA isn't here to embarrass history. It's here to complete it, to fill in the gaps, to give voice to people who were erased on paper but survived in reality. So when confidence clashes with evidence, the lesson isn't shame, it's growth. And coming up next, the DNA discovery that forced historians to rewrite an entire chapter they thought was finished. Stay right here. How does DNA actually uncover history? No lab coats required. Think of your DNA like a massive historical record that never forgot anything. Every generation leaves a tiny note behind, passed down quietly, long after names, borders, and languages changed. Here's the funny part. Think of DNA like Facebook tagging your ancestors. Except nobody can untag you. No edits. No, that wasn't me. No deleting the post. Those genetic tags connect you to populations that lived hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Scientists compare your DNA to massive reference databases built from people whose ancestry is already known. When patterns match, history lights up. That's how geneticists can tell whether groups migrated, merged, or stayed connected, even when written records went missing. Now let's visualize it. On screen, a DNA test kit. Then a family tree appears. Then lines start connecting branches that were never written down. That's the key difference. History relies on paper. DNA relies on patterns. And patterns don't lie, they repeat. So when DNA finds native ancestry in regions where textbooks said tribes disappeared, it's not rewriting history for fun. It's uncovering connections that survived quietly through families, marriages, and adaptation. This is how so-called lost tribes were found. Not because they reappeared, but because science finally knew where to look. And here's what makes this powerful. DNA doesn't care about race, politics, or pride. It only tracks inheritance, which means your story might be bigger than you were told. Quick interactive moment. Answer honestly in the comments or the poll on screen. Would you take a DNA test if it could uncover a lost tribe in your family tree? Yes? No? Or only if I'm emotionally prepared? Here's the mature takeaway. DNA doesn't replace culture. It doesn't decide identity. It simply shows connections. It gives history a second draft, one written by biology instead of memory. And in the next section, we're going to look at a real case where DNA didn't just correct a footnote. It forced historians to rethink an entire narrative.
Stay with me.
Because when DNA started doing what DNA does best, historians had to sit up, reread their own work and whisper, "Wait, that's not how we wrote it." Let's start with the shocker. Entire native communities that history labeled extinct. Yeah, not extinct. DNA revealed descendants living under different tribal names, different regions, sometimes even different identities altogether. History thought the story ended. DNA said, "Nah, this was just the mid-season finale." And here's where the twist kicks in. Some tribes believed to be isolated for centuries. Turns out they were genetically connected to neighboring groups the textbooks treated like strangers. Migration, intermarriage, survival. It was all happening quietly, while history froze the story in ink. On screen, old textbook claim. Got 2, modern genetic map lighting up unexpected regions. That moment right there? That's history getting fact-checked by biology. Now let's lighten it up for a second, because this line deserves its own moment. History books wrote the story. DNA is editing the sequel. And like any good sequel, it's exposing plot holes. For example, some ancestry tests uncovered native genetic markers in families who were told their lineage was strictly European. Others revealed native ancestry in regions where historians swore tribes vanished centuries ago. That doesn't mean history was lying. It means history was working with incomplete information. And DNA found the missing pages. Quick pause. If your mind is doing backflips right now, do me a favor. Hit that like button before your brain explodes. Consider it emotional support. Here's the mature takeaway most people rush past. History is written by humans. DNA is written by inheritance. One is shaped by power, perspective, and memory. The other is shaped by survival. And when those two disagree, it's not a crisis. It's an opportunity. An opportunity to understand native history as living, evolving, and resilient, not frozen in museum displays or outdated chapters. These discoveries don't erase culture. They don't hand out identities. They simply reveal connections we didn't know were still there. And coming up next, the question that makes people uncomfortable at family reunions. If DNA contradicts the story you grew up with, which one do you keep? Stay right here. So why does any of this matter right now? Why should DNA discoveries from centuries ago affect people scrolling YouTube in 2026? Because history isn't just something we read, it's something we live inside. For a long time, identity was decided by paperwork, census forms, government records, tribal rolls, history books written by people who weren't there, and sometimes didn't ask. But DNA changed the rules of the room. Suddenly, ancestry isn't just about what was written down, it's about what was passed down, silently, cell by cell. For Native American communities, this matters deeply. Recognition affects land rights, cultural preservation, legal status, even access to healthcare and education. And here's the twist. DNA is confirming what many tribes have always said. We never disappeared. We adapted. We survived. History labeled them as gone. DNA labeled them as continuous. And that's powerful. But it also gets uncomfortable, fast. Because when DNA rewrites history, it challenges modern identities too. People discover ancestry they weren't taught, or lose certainty about stories they grew up with, or realize history was selective. And that raises a big question. If science changes the past we believe in, does it change who we are today? Some people worry DNA will erase culture. But here's the truth. DNA doesn't replace culture. It supports it. Culture is lived. DNA is evidence. One explains who you are. The other explains how you got here. And politically, this shakes things up. Governments don't love uncertainty. Systems prefer clean lines. DNA prefers reality. But history has never been clean. It's layered, messy, human. And that's actually the beauty of this moment. Because we're not watching history collapse, we're watching it mature. Quick reflection. Drop this in the comments. If DNA rewrites history, does it change who we are today, or just reveal who we always were? There's no wrong answer. That's the conversation. And coming up next, the discovery that didn't just surprise historians, it forced institutions to admit they got it wrong. Stay with me. So here's the truth most history books don't like to admit. History isn't always what your teacher said in class. Sometimes it's hiding in your genes. For centuries, Native American tribes were labeled lost, extinct, or assimilated. But DNA just walked into the room like, about that. Science didn't erase history. It exposed the missing chapters. And that's why this conversation matters more than politics, more than Trump, and even more than viral sound bites. Because DNA doesn't care about opinions. It doesn't care about speeches. It doesn't care who's loud on social media. DNA keeps records, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment humans are ready to listen. And let's be honest, that moment is now. What's fascinating is that these discoveries don't just change what we know, they challenge who we think we are. Identity isn't always something written on paper. Sometimes it's written in code, genetic code. That's why entire communities are revisiting their roots, reclaiming languages, traditions, and recognition that history once tried to bury. Now here's where you come in. Which tribe discovery shocked you the most in this video? Was it the one history ignored, the one politics dismissed, or the one DNA quietly proved was always there? Drop it in the comments. I read them, and your perspective adds to this story. And do me a favor, share this video with that one friend who knows history a little too confidently. You know the one. Let's see how they react when science enters the conversation. If this video made you think differently, even just a little, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this content matters. And if you enjoy history that's honest, scientific, and not afraid to challenge popular narratives, subscribe. Because on this channel, we don't just repeat history. We re-examine it. And sometimes we let DNA tell the story history got wrong. See you in the next one.